How's it going, everyone? My name is Swanee, and today I've got a pretty massive video for you guys. Now, in today's video, I wanted to go over everything that you need to know for Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. I'm going to cover some tips and tricks that you might not know. I'm going to explain some of the basic HUD features that aren't really explained in the game. I'm going to go over impact clashes and how to improve on all your defensive skills. And then lastly, I'm going to go over a few of my favorite combo moves that I feel that everyone needs to know. So I know there's a wide variety of different skilled players out there. Some of you might be pretty great at the game already, and some of you might be picking up the game for the very first time today. So for your convenience, I put timestamps down below, so if you want to skip over certain parts, or if you ever need to come back to this video in the future, you can skip ahead using the timestamps. So with all that said, if this video helps you out at any point, consider giving me a thumbs up because it helps me out in the algorithm and it lets me know you guys are interested in seeing more of these videos in the future. And let's go ahead and jump right into it. So the first tip I want to go over in today's video has to do with the what-if scenarios that take place during the story mode. Now, I've seen a lot of confusion online where people aren't understanding how to activate these what-if scenarios. It doesn't really explain it to you in the game, and they don't give you an explanation when you're at the menu and you're selecting the missions, which is probably why a lot of people don't understand how to beat them. But if you load up the mission itself and you pause the game, if you head to Battle Details, it will list all the objectives for the current mission, and here is where it will list the alternate objectives. So in this example, it says reduce Majin Buu's health quickly. It doesn't tell you how quickly, it just says quickly, and it took me a bunch of different attempts. Just do it as fast as humanly possible, and if you don't get it, just retry over and over and over until you do. I went off and played the game and practiced and got better, and then once I got better and more confident in my combo abilities, I went back to this mission and was able to beat it pretty easily. So if you're struggling with any of these alternative what-if missions, go practice, get better, and come back later. Alright, so next up, I want to go into explaining the HUD details. This game does a very poor job of explaining all the different features of your HUD and what's going on screen. They kind of just want you to figure it out as you go, and it can be very overwhelming when you're just starting out. So don't worry, I've got you covered. We're going to break down each part of the HUD for you guys. So the first thing I want to mention, and probably one of the most important ones on this list, are skill points. Now, skill points are the really big numbers that appear for both you and your opponent right underneath the health bar on the left and the right side of the screen. Now, this little meter will fill up slowly over time, and it will fill up even faster depending on how much damage you deal. So you definitely want to stay on the offensive so that you get more skill points. Now, why are these skill points so important? Well, they're used for a lot of different things. They're used for defensive abilities that I'll talk about a little bit more later on this video. They're used for transformations and fusions. They're used for your sparking ability. The skill point number is something you want to glance at frequently. You will always want to have a mental note of how many skill points you have at a given time, because some of your abilities require 1 skill point, some of them require 2 skill points, and you aren't going to be able to activate them unless you have that many skill points. Alright, so now that we know what skill points are, when I'm referring to skill points throughout the rest of this video, this is what I'm talking about. So next up, I want to talk about this little symbol that appears on your screen from time to time with certain characters, and this little number that's associated with it. Now, I played this game for hours before I finally realized what this number actually meant. If you're like me, you just load up the game, go straight into story mode, and just play, and then you kind of just figure it out as you go. But what this little number on your screen does is it shows you how many transformations you currently can make at the given time. And if you hold up on the D-pad, it will open up your transformations menu, and here it will show you how many skill points it costs to transform or fuse. So if it's got a number 1 beside it, obviously it's going to cost 1 skill point to transform into that. If it has a 2 or a 3, that's how many skill points it's going to cost to change into those transformations. Now, with the transformations in this game, let's say, for example, you go Super Saiyan, you can always revert back to your base form if you choose to do so. Now, if you decide to use Fusion, on the other hand, that is permanent. So if you're in the middle of a battle and you decide to fuse, that fusion is going to last for the entirety of the match. So just make sure that you're 100% sure before you decide to fuse your characters. So next up, let's talk about this little tiny symbol here. It's like a swapping symbol where there's 2 arrows, and this symbol explains when your team swap is on cooldown. So when this symbol is fully recharged, it means that you are allowed to switch to a different team member, and when it's grayed out, that means it's on cooldown and you cannot switch to a different team member. This is to prevent you from just spamming your different characters over and over and over again. And then the next part of the HUD that I want to talk about are these little buff symbols that pop up underneath your health bar during your matches. And I never knew what any of these did. I would just be playing as like Goku, for example, and I would activate one of my abilities, and then suddenly I got a bunch of buffs underneath my health bar. Well, if you don't know what an ability does, you can just pause the game and go to the explanation of controls menu, and here it will give you details of all your different abilities. So as you're going around playing as different characters and trying to learn all their movesets, make sure you check out this menu often because every single character is going to have different movesets and different abilities. So the next part of the HUD I want to go over are these little yellow boxes that appear underneath your health bar. Now this is going to be your ki bar, and this is pretty essential to every single one of your matches. You're going to want to keep an eye on your ki meter pretty much throughout the entirety of your match. The more ki you have, the more abilities you can get off. You use ki for different abilities like your blast attacks or your power-up moves. You use ki to dodge and teleport out of the way. You use ki to fly. You use ki for basically everything. And you want to keep an eye on this because if you're low on ki and you go charging straight into the battle, if you go straight into the fight and you don't have enough ki, you're not going to be able to block or dodge or get out of the way or get off any of your abilities, and that's going to put you at a big disadvantage. So any chance you get to charge up your ki, you're going to want to take it. And since we're on the topic of charging up your ki, another side tip I want to give you guys is that if you're underwater, charging up your ki takes way longer than if you're above water. So I know there's a couple different maps where you can go underwater, and it's pretty cool to fight underwater. It's pretty cinematic, but it definitely puts you at a disadvantage, especially if your opponent is up above water and they're charging up their ki and you're below water. It's going to take you way longer. So anytime you find yourself in water, make sure you get out of the water before you try to charge up. And then the final thing I want to talk about are these little tiny boxes up at the top of your health bar. Now, if you're a veteran player, you probably know exactly what this means, but if you're a new player, these little boxes determine how many bars of health you have left. So you'll start off with full bars, which means you have full boxes, and then as your health bar depletes, one of the boxes check away. So if you only have one box left, then you're getting pretty close to dead. Same goes for your opponent. This is a good way to gauge just how much health you and your opponents have at all times. Alright, so moving on, next up I want to talk about your sparking ability. Now sparking is when you fully charge up your ki meter to the absolute max. And when you charge up this way, this makes your attacks much faster, so you can get off some pretty big combos. This is how you cast your ultimate ability. You can't activate your ultimate ability unless you're in sparking mode. And if you've ever tried to activate your sparking mode and it just wouldn't activate, well, the reason why is because it requires you to have at least one skill point saved up before you can go sparking. So every time you go to activate your sparking, it's going to cost you one skill point. The first day that I played this game, I probably pumped in like 10 plus hours where I would try to activate my sparking and it just wouldn't work and I had no idea why. Well, I'm here to prevent you from making the same mistake, and yeah, you have to have at least one skill point to go sparking mode. Another tip I want to give you guys for your sparking is that you want to get the most out of your sparking meter by making it last as long as possible and wait till the very last minute to use your ultimate move. You don't want to activate sparking and then immediately use your ultimate ability. What you want to do is as soon as you activate sparking, you want to charge your opponent and get off as many combos as possible, and then at the very end of your combo, when you send your opponent flying, that's when you activate your ultimate. Another important thing to remember while you're sparking is that your defensive abilities are also amplified as well. So if you go to block certain ki attacks, and depending on your character, when you're in sparking mode, you can just deflect / dodge pretty much everything while you're in this mode. So if you want to succeed in Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, you want to be in your sparking mode as much as possible and as often as possible. So any chance you get to knock your opponent away and you have a second or two to breathe, charge up your ki to try to get to sparking. So the next tip in today's video is how you can very quickly and reliably farm millions of Zeni over and over again. So the easiest way and the most reliable way to make Zeni is just by completing matches. You get a small amount of Zeni for every match that you complete. You get Zeni from completing missions in the story mode, regular offline battle modes, And then a quick way to get a large burst of Zeni is by going through all of the different tournament modes that the game has to offer. The World Tournament, the Cell Games, the Tournament of Power, all of them will reward you with 160,000 Zeni for each one that you complete. And if that's still not enough Zeni and you want to go farming even more so you can unlock all the different outfits and customization options and stuff, one of the best ways to earn Zeni is by going back into the story missions, and any mission that rewards an outfit, if you go back and redo that mission, it will give you that same outfit again, but it will convert it into Zeni. So one of the best farms that I did was very early on in Goku's storyline when you face Frieza. If you go and complete this mission over and over and over, it will reward you with 300,000 Zeni every time you complete it. And the reason this mission is one of the best ones to do it on is because it starts you off at the very beginning of the match already in your sparking mode. So you can just start the match, spam your combos, get off a couple ultimates, and the match is over, and then you can just wash, rinse, repeat, and you can get rich very quickly. So if you're short on Zeni, go farm these missions ASAP. So next up, I want to go over how you obtain all the different Dragon Balls in the game. Now there's actually a couple of different ways that you can get Dragon Balls. One of the easiest ways to get Dragon Balls is by completing Whis' wishes. If you go to the tab with Zeno and Whis, Whis has a number of different wishes that he wants you to fulfill, and if you complete all 7 of them, he will reward you with 7 of the Dragon Balls. Now, unfortunately, you can only get 7 Dragon Balls by doing this for Whis, and then after that, you have to go and farm them over and over and over again. Which leads me into the second way that you can obtain Dragon Balls, and it's by just playing matches. So what I found to be the fastest way to farm these Dragon Balls is that if you go into the offline battles, and you go into the settings, make the arena the world tournament, and then go into the settings and turn out of bounds on. Then while you're in the settings, you want to go ahead and make the opponent weak, so they're as weak as possible. And then when you're choosing the characters, you want to choose one of the most powerful characters in the game. So for me, I picked Whis. And then you want to pick a really weak character to go against, so I picked Mr. Satan. And then all you have to do is either defeat them really quickly or knock them out of bounds. And then at the end of the battle, it has a random RNG chance to award you with any of the Dragon Balls. Now in my farming, I've only been able to get Shinron and Purunga Dragon Balls to drop. I've not gotten any Super Dragon Balls to drop, so I'm not sure if they drop by doing this or not. If they do, they have a pretty rare chance in doing so, which leads me into how do we get Super Dragon Balls if it's not through this? Well, you can actually obtain some Super Dragon Balls just by playing the main story. If you go and fully complete the story missions with some of the different characters, for example, I know if you go through and beat it completely with Goku, once you get to the very end, they will reward you with a full set of Super Dragon Balls. Fair warning though, that if you have full Super Dragon Balls and then you don't spend them and then you complete an activity that's going to reward you with more Super Dragon Balls, they will just completely disappear and you'll miss out on them. So as soon as you get the Dragon Balls, you don't want to hoard them. There's no need to hoard them. Go activate the Dragon Balls as soon as possible and spend your wish on whatever you want. That way you can get back to collecting even more. Definitely do not hoard your Dragon Balls. So for the next part of the video, I want to focus on combat. And first up, I want to explain all the different impact clashes that can happen and how to do them, because the game does an absolutely awful job at explaining them. Anytime one of these clashes would happen, I basically just button mashed and hoped for the best. Because they happen so quickly, I had no time to try to learn how to do them. So I'm sure a lot of you are probably in the same boat of not having any idea how to complete these. So let's start off with the power impact. So for the power impact, if you get locked up in this type of impact animation, you need to hold down the X or the square button and try to get the meter as close to the line as possible to beat your opponent. If you go over the line, you fail, and if your opponent fills it up more than you, then you also fail. And if you're struggling during the power impact, you can boost it with the right trigger to give yourself more meter to fill. And if you are going to boost it, if you use the boost, it takes up some of your keys. So keep that in mind before you just immediately hit the boost button. You don't want to just hit the boost every time it pops up. And if you do use the boost, make sure you don't take your finger off of the X or the square button while you press the right trigger. A good way to practice this is in Goku's story mission where you face Kale in the Tournament of Power, because at the very beginning of this battle, there's a clash that it forces you into, and you can restart it over and over and over. So if you want to practice this specific power impact impact on repeat, I recommend that you do this mission. It's probably the fastest way that you can do it. Now you can also set it up so you can practice it in the training mode. I just found that it was more convenient and a lot easier to access by doing it in Goku's story mission. So just remember, you want to hold down the X or the square button and fill up that meter as close to the line as possible, and if you do, you will win the power impact. And if you're still confused about how to do this, you can always pause the game and head to the explanation of controls and go over to the impact tab and scroll down to whatever impact you're struggling with, and it will give you an in-text explanation as to how to beat it and what buttons you need to push. So next up on the list is the speed impact. Now this is when two dragon dashes collide. Now a dragon dash is when you hold in right trigger and then you double tap the A button or the X button if you're using the default controls, and then you will instantly fly at like super speed behind your opponent. And then if you both do this at the same time, this is called a speed impact and you two will collide with each other. Now this is broken up into two phases. There's the first phase, which is very quick, and this is called the single strike phase. Now here there's going to be a big circle and it's going to be closing in, and you have to press X or square as close to the center of the circle as possible. Then after the first phase is over, you will enter the second phase, which is called the rapid strike phase, and you need to spam the crap out of the X or the square button as quickly as possible to get more hits in than your opponent. If you have enough ki to use a boost during the speed impact, it will make it a lot easier to hit the center of the circle during the strike phase, and it will also make your attacks be a lot better and more rapid during the second phase. And of course, you can always do this in the practice training mode as well, but what I found to be the best way to practice this is also in Goku's story missions, where you face Dispo, and then there's a later mission where you face Jiren, and this happens in the beginning of both of those matches, and you can just retry it over and over and over. So that's how I practiced it. I went up against Dispo, I would do it, hit the retry button, do it again, retry, do it again, and just do it over and over and over until you feel comfortable with it. So the next impact on our list is the blast impact. Now this happens when two blast attacks go off at the same time and collide to make an energy clash. And when this happens, whoever has the highest power wins, and to do that, you have to hit the Y or the triangle button when the meter fills up. Don't spam the button. If you do that, you're going to fail. Just wait until the meter gets as close to full as possible before you hit Y or triangle. And you can increase the meter by using a boost. So if you use the boost, that will increase the maximum amount of meter that you can fill, and then you want to time it just right so you get the maximum meter. And then at the end of it, whoever has the most of their meter filled up will win the blast impact. And then the final impact to go over is the crash impact, and this happens when both you and your opponent dash towards each other at the same time using either the X or the A button. And when this happens, for this one, all you have to do is press the correct button that pops up on screen. To win this impact, you need to get 3 out of the 5 button presses before your opponent does to win, and if you hit the correct button, you gain a point, and if you hit the wrong button, you lose a point. Using a boost during this impact will give you more time to react to pick the correct button, so if you have good reflexes and a good reaction time, you don't have to waste a boost on this one to win. And now that we've gone over all the different impacts, I want to talk about what is called limit boost collapse. Now this happens when you use a boost during an impact and you boost too much and you overextend on your ki meter and you use more ki than what you have. And when this happens, your character will run out of breath and they'll sit there just waiting and waiting and waiting until they get their breath back. And if you get knocked down on the ground, your character will just lay there, and this opens you up to tons of different attacks, and you basically just can't even move until you recharge that ki. And to get out of this, what you need to do is just spam your X, Y, B, A, or your triangle, circle, square, and X buttons, depending on what controller you're using. Just spam the absolute crap out of any of these buttons to help speed up this recovery process. If you don't spam the crap out of these buttons, it's going to take absolutely forever for you to recover. So spam, spam, spam. If you find yourself in this situation where you did an impact, you boosted a little too many times, and then you run out of breath. Now for the next part of the video, I want to talk about combat defense. Now, I'm going to start off covering the very basics and then get a little bit more advanced as I go. So the very first thing I want to talk about is how to deflect ki blasts. Now, you do this with either right bumper or R1, depending on your controller, right as a ki blast is about to hit you. The RB/R1 button is also used for what's called high-speed evasion, and you hit this button right as an enemy makes contact with you, and then you'll teleport behind them. This is probably one of the most important skills to learn in the entire game, so I recommend that you go and practice it over and over and over again with Piccolo in the training area. Now, every time you do this, it's going to cost you a little bit of ki when you use it, but this is going to be the most reliable counter move that you can make in the game. So you want to tap the RB or R1 button right as an enemy hits you to high speed evade out of the way, and then if you just want to block an attack, you just hold down the RB or R1 button, and then while you're holding down the button, you hit up on the stick to block up, or you hit down on the stick to block down. So if an enemy is trying to hit you from above, you block up, and if an enemy is trying to hit you from below, you block down. The next defensive move I want to go over is Perception, and once I finally learned how to use this the correct way, it was a complete game changer for me. Now, to use Perception, you have to hold down the B button or the circle button, and this will automatically dodge any incoming moves that are coming your way. Now, while you're holding down this Perception button, it is going to slowly drain your ki, so you're not going to want to stand there and just hold this button down at all times. You're going to want to time it accordingly and only use it right as you're about to get attacked. So when you're using Perception and you try to block any regular melee attacks, it isn't going to cost you any skill points to use. It's only going to cost you a little bit of ki, but you can just stand there and dodge any incoming melee attacks at absolutely no skill cost. You can also block heavy and charge attacks when using Perception, so if an enemy is charging up their punch and they go to hit you with a charged attack, just hold down the Perception button and it will cost you 1 skill point to automatically dodge any of those heavy charged attacks. Now, another cool thing you can do is you can deflect blast attacks by using Perception if you have 2 skill points available. So for example, I was Vegeta and I was going up against Kid Buu and he hit me with a blast and I just held down the Perception button and I automatically just deflected it. And if you're able to do this and deflect a blast using Perception, it will give you a small little status buff that will improve your ki charge immensely. So definitely keep this in mind and keep an eye on how many skill points you have at all times. That way you can use Perception pretty much throughout the battle. So to further expand on Perception, if you hold down RB and press the B button or hold R1 and press circle, right as an enemy is about to hit you with a melee attack, you'll do this flashy looking high speed counter that just looks really cool. So yeah, this is probably one of my favorite defensive moves in the entire game. So the next big defensive move on our list is called a revenge counter, and this happens by clicking the right stick right after you get attacked. And this can be used at any range. If you get hit with like a far range blast or a medium range blast or up close and personal combat, you can revenge counter in almost any scenario, but it is going to cost you 2 skill points, so it is pretty costly. And even though it's costly, it can be worth it to use it in a pinch. If you have no other option and you're really getting comboed and you need a way to break free from it, this is a good way to do so. And this is another reason why you need to keep an eye out on your skill points at all times. Have an idea of how many skill points you have. If you have 2 or 3 saved up and you can afford to do a revenge counter, this might be the way to go. And revenge counters are one of the few ways I found that you can counter an opponent while you're getting hit in the back and taking a ton of back shots. Same goes for the super counter. I know a lot of people have been complaining about getting hit in the back. There's not really too many ways to deal with it. Well, if you use a super counter, which is where you hit up on the left stick and the X button or up on the left stick and the square button, right as an enemy is attacking you, you will perform a super counter. And super counters are really, really hard to pull off, and they're going to take a lot of practice for you to get right, so I recommend going into the practice mode and trying those out just over and over and over against Piccolo. But if you are getting hit in the back, or if you're getting comboed and you're just getting the absolute crap kicked out of you, just click the right stick if you have 2 skill points, and you will do a revenge counter, and then if you hit up and the attack button, you will do a super counter. But what happens if your opponent does a revenge counter on you? Well, if your opponent is trying to counter you with a revenge counter, if you hold down the perception button that we just talked about a little bit ago, as soon as they try to counter you, you will counter their counter but it will cost you 2 skill points. So this is also really difficult to pull off because you have to have really fast reflexes, and it's hard to predict when your opponent is going to counter you, but if you get an eye for it and you know the sounds and the cues, and if you're a veteran player, this is one of those tools that it's going to come in real handy. And then the last defensive thing I want to talk about is ways to avoid ultimate abilities. I've seen a lot of people in the community wondering how to get around ultimate abilities. Is there a way to block them? Is there a way to run past them? Well, in my experience, the best way to get around ultimate abilities is just to use the X button or the A button and just try to dash out of the way. I couldn't tell you how many times an ultimate ability was coming my way and I just quickly dash to the side of it. I know it works really well against like Piccolo. Sometimes it works really well against those big beam attacks. It is a little bit harder to dodge those giant ball attacks. So like if you get hit with a Spirit Bomb or Frieza Supernova, those are going to be pretty hard to dash out of the way of. So in those types of scenarios where you're going up against those really big ultimates, I like to do the Z burst dash. And that's when you hold down the right trigger and you hit the A button or the X button twice. And then that's when you like fly really fast around the enemy and get behind them. I found that that's a really good way to get around some of those ultimates as well. So if you've been really struggling with some of those ultimate moves, hopefully this tip helps you out. So now to finish out the video, I want to go over a couple of my favorite combo moves that have really helped me out a ton during my playthrough of the game. Now, I'm not going over any crazy over-the-top combos. I've seen some crazy videos where people get like 50 to 100 plus hits without stopping. I'm not here to teach you guys that. I mean, let's be real, those are impressive, but the average person is going to struggle to get off an insane combo like that. It just doesn't happen very often, especially if you're playing online. So I'm going to teach you some very basic combos that are still very helpful, and then you can kind of just branch off from these combos and do your own thing from there. So the first combo I want to talk about is the combo move that turns your enemies around. Now this is going to be some variation of XXXXY or square, 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 triangle. Now this is going to vary from character to character. Every character is going to be different, so depending on what your favorite character is, kind of play around with them and figure it out, but every character has some variation of this combo. So what this does is it turns your enemies around so you can hit them in the back, and attacks from behind are pretty close to impossible to counter. It's very difficult to do so. So if you can do a big combo against an enemy by hitting them in the back and then transitioning that into an ultimate or a blast move, you're going to get off a ton of damage. So for example, I used Topo. He did it in 3 hits, XXY. Gohan did it in 4 hits, XXXY. And then Super Buu, it took him 5 hits to pull off the combo, which was XXXXY. So depending on how strong your character is will probably determine how many punches you need to do before you hit them with the key attack. But I highly recommend on whatever character you like to use, whatever one is your favorite, test around with different variations, maybe punch them once or twice, then hit the Y button or the triangle button, and if that doesn't work, hit them 3 times, 4 times. But the whole point of this combo is trying to turn your enemy around. So the next combo on this list is one of my favorites, and it's XXXX, and then holding down the Y button and down on the left stick so you can do a leg sweep, and then on PlayStation it's square, 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 and then hold down triangle with down on the left stick, and then you'll do a leg sweep. And then when you leg sweep them, you want to grab them by holding down RB or R1 and then hitting the X button or the square button. Now this also depends on the character. If an enemy is too far away from you after you leg sweep them, then sometimes you have to hit the dash button, which is just X or A. So you want to punch, 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 leg sweep them, dash, and then grab. And then as you grab the enemy off the ground and throw them, this will always open them up to either a blast attack, or sometimes I like to hit my ultimate, and they can't dodge it, and it's almost always a guaranteed hit. And then if you pull off this same combo, as soon as you throw the enemy, instead of hitting them with a blast or an ultimate, if you just hit the B button or the circle button, you'll do this slam move where you just slam them down on the ground every single time. So in my opinion, this is one of the very best quick combos that you can get off in the entire game. Just punch, 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 leg sweep, grab them, throw them, and then ultimate move. So that is going to do it for everything in today's video. This video took a ton of time to make, so if you guys enjoyed it, please consider hitting the thumbs up button. It helps me out in the algorithm. And consider hitting the subscribe button if you're new here. That way you don't miss out on any future videos. And with that said, that is going to do it for me, guys, and I will talk to you all in the next video.